This is not a weapon of war. It is a surgical instrument of terrifying efficiency. Its killing power was measured not on the battlefield, but on stacks of human bodies. One blade, one swing. 7 torsos severed. This is not a myth. It is a verifiable historical fact. The proof is not in a scroll, but chiseled directly into the steel tang of the blade itself. A permanent, physical record. But how did a code of honor produce such a cold, empirical science of slaughter? What kind of mindset is required to not just kill, but to measure, document, and certify lethality on human flesh? The stories we're told of Bushido are a romantic lie, designed to obscure a system of calculated cruelty. Join us as we expose the true anatomy of this code, and you will learn that testing swords on the dead was just a prerequisite. The real test of their precision was a ritual performed on the living, a final act of honor that was, in reality, a medical nightmare. Picture this scene. An expert, under the sterile lights of a modern lab, holds centuries of history in their gloved hands. The blade itself is a work of art. You can see the hamon, the temper line, shimmering like a wave frozen in steel. It's lethally sharp, of course, but that's not what's important right now. What's important is the part you were never meant to see. The part hidden beneath the hilt, the nakago, or tang. It's rough, dark, unpolished. It was never meant for beauty. It was meant for truth. And as the camera pushes closer, the characters become clear. They weren't carved with grace. They were hammered in, punched into the metal with force and finality. Stole, nanatsu-dō, 7 bodies. It's a boast, a mark of quality, a horrifying receipt for a product test conducted on human beings. This single piece of physical evidence shatters the romantic illusion of the noble samurai. It points to a hidden world, a backstage to history where honor was secondary to function, and human life was a unit of measurement. So, how did this happen? How did a warrior class, renowned for its discipline and philosophy, sanction this? The answer is more disturbing than you can imagine, because this inscription isn't an anomaly. It is the endpoint of a system we are going to dismantle, piece by horrifying piece. To understand the science behind the 7-body cut, you first have to understand the myth that made it necessary. That myth was necessary because the truth is so much harder to sell. We think we know the samurai. The image is instantly recognizable. A lone warrior, meditating under a cherry blossom tree, his sword's a symbol of his soul. He is a master of the tea ceremony, a composer of poetry, a man whose every action is governed by Bushido, a code of absolute honor, unwavering loyalty, and supreme self-control. We picture a world of Zen-like calm and fierce, clean battles where death is met with a stoic grace. Every movie, every book, every piece of art has reinforced this image of the perfect warrior, a blend of lethal skill and profound philosophy. This is the fantasy. It's beautiful, it's compelling, and it is a carefully constructed lie. Beneath the ink-wash paintings and the stoic philosophy was a foundation of calculated brutality. Beneath the art of the sword was the science of the slaughterhouse. The serene garden was watered with the blood of the execution yard. The code we call Bushido, as it's popularly understood, was largely written down and romanticized during a long period of peace, looking back with rose-tinted glasses on a past that was anything but peaceful. It was a rebranding, a way to civilize a history of unimaginable violence. The real code that governed the samurai for centuries was not written in philosophical texts. It was written in blood on battlefields and screamed from the execution grounds. To understand that inscription on the sword tang, we have to look past the myth. We have to peel back the layers of propaganda and see the raw, terrifying world that created the samurai. A world not of honor, but of chaos. A world where power was the only virtue, and fear was the ultimate tool of control. Forget the cherry blossoms. Forget the poetry. We are going back to the beginning, to an age of total war, where the only rule was survival and justice was simply a performance of terror. What you are about to see is the real crucible that forged the samurai class, and it will change the way you see them forever. That crucible has a name, the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. For more than a century, Japan was not a unified country. It was a shattered landscape of hundreds of warring clans, each led by a warlord, a daimyo, fighting for scraps of land and power. There was no central law, no emperor with real authority, only the sword. Imagine living in a world of constant gnawing paranoia. The farmer in the next field could be a spy. The neighboring province could invade without warning. Your lord today might be a headless corpse tomorrow, his castle a smoking ruin. Life was brutally cheap, and loyalty was a commodity that could be bought or betrayed at a moment's notice. In this inferno of chaos, a warlord could not rule through honor or respect. He ruled through pure, unadulterated fear. When you conquered a village, how did you ensure its terrified peasants wouldn't rebel the moment your soldiers left? You couldn't afford to leave a large garrison. So, you made an example. Punishment was not about justice. It was a public performance, a theatrical production of agony designed to be seared into the collective memory of the survivors. It had to be loud, it had to be public, and most importantly, it had to be slow. A quick death was a wasted opportunity. The goal was to create a spectacle of suffering so profound it would crush the will to resist for a generation. This is the logic of terror, and it became the foundation of samurai governance. They needed punishments that could be seen from a distance, that would last for days, that would assault every sense: the sight of the mutilated body, the sound of the screams, the smell of death baking in the sunday. This was the only law that mattered. So, what did this performance of terror actually look like? What was the first act in this theater of cruelty? The answer would be raised on hillsides overlooking towns and along major roadways for all to see. A symbol of suffering, twisted into an instrument of absolute control. That symbol of suffering, raised on hillsides for all to see, was the cross. On February 5th, 1597, on a cold, wind-swept hill overlooking the port of Nagasaki, this instrument of control was perfected. Imagine being one of the condemned, forced up that muddy slope. The jeers of the crowd mixing with the whistling of the wind. Your sentence is haritsuke, crucifixion. But this is not the crucifixion you know from Western history. There are no nails. Nails are inefficient. They tear through flesh, cause massive shock, and lead to a relatively quick death. A quick death, remember, was a wasted opportunity. This was engineered for something else entirely. This was engineered for endurance. They would lay the cross on the ground and tie you to it with rough, thick ropes, pulling them so tight they bite into your wrists, your ankles, your chest. Then, a small, saddle-like block of wood would be fixed beneath you, designed to take most of your body's weight. It's a simple, brutal piece of engineering. It prevents the ropes from cutting off circulation too quickly, and it stops your own weight from suffocating you. Its sole purpose is to keep you alive and conscious for as long as possible. Then comes the moment they raise the cross. The world tilts and then slams into place with a jolt. Your entire weight drops onto the ropes, and that small block of wood, you are now part of the landscape. A living warning. Below you, your city. Around you, the sky. And you wait. You hang there for hours, the cold seeping into your bones, your muscles screaming in protest. The crowd watches. They wait. The sun begins to sink towards the horizon. But you do not die. This is the crucial detail that the sanitized versions of history leave out. The cross was not the weapon. It was merely the stage for the final act. The real horror, the part that was designed to shatter the will of anyone watching, was yet to come. Death would not creep in slowly from exposure. It would be delivered. It would be delivered with methodical precision. As the sun set, two figures would approach the cross, not with swords, but with long spears. Eyewitness accounts, buried for centuries in Jesuit archives, describe the final, horrifying act. Two executioners, one on each side. Two spears. They move in unison, a practiced and synchronized ballet of death, They plant their feet, aim, and thrust upwards from below the ribcage, the spearheads crossing paths inside the victim's body. But this is not a death blow. A direct thrust to the heart is quick, merciful even. This was the opposite. Modern forensic analysis of the method, known as hikayari, shows a terrifying anatomical knowledge. The first thrusts were deliberately angled to miss the heart, instead puncturing the lungs from below. The spearheads themselves were often triangular, designed to create wounds that tore through tissue and would not seal, maximizing internal bleeding. Imagine the feeling, a sudden, sharp, white-hot agony. But you don't die. Instead, a lung collapses. You feel a desperate, urgent need for air that you cannot satisfy. You begin to drown, slowly, in your own blood, all while fully conscious, hanging for all to see. This was a calculated medical procedure of pain. The executioners were in complete control, able to prolong the agony for minutes or even hours, letting the victim suffocate before delivering a final, fatal thrust to the heart. It was the ultimate demonstration of power, not just the power to kill, but the power to control the very process of dying. But for the ultimate expression of horrifying, public death, an execution that would be remembered not as a cold science but as a primal scream of terror. Even this wasn't enough. The primal horror of the Sengoku period was a product of its time, loud, chaotic, and designed for maximum public terror. But what happens when the wars end? After 1600, Japan was unified under the Tokugawa shogunate, kicking off a period of unprecedented peace that would last for over 250 years. The chaos subsided. The castles were no longer on fire, but the cruelty did not disappear. It evolved. It moved from the battlefield to the laboratory. It became colder, more bureaucratic, and chillingly scientific. The public spectacle designed to terrify peasants was replaced by the quiet, methodical work of the state execution grounds. The samurai themselves changed. Their armor was put in storage. They became administrators, poets, and officials. Their swords now symbols of status rather than tools of war. But the killing continued. Only now it was sanctioned, documented, and refined. This is where we return to our sword. That inscription, 7 bodies, was not carved during the heat of battle. It was certified during this new era of peace. The evidence for this comes from a source that official histories conveniently omit. We are talking about the private, meticulous records of the Yamada clan. For generations, this family held a unique position. They were the shogun's official sword testers and executioners. Their profession was passed down from father to son. They were not warriors charging into battle. They were anatomists of death, and their job was to test the tools of the state on the bodies of the condemned. Their hidden logs and manuals document everything, not with philosophical poetry, but with the cold, detached language of a technical report. They detail the best angles for a specific cut, the types of bodies used, and the precise results of each test. What you are about to see is the secret science they perfected, a discipline that treated the human body as nothing more than a test medium to be measured, cut, and recorded. That secret science was called tameshigiri sword testing. It was a grim procedure carried out on the muddy, blood-soaked execution grounds on the outskirts of Edo. Here, condemned criminals, and sometimes their fresh corpses, were no longer treated as human. They became test subjects. Their bodies were used to empirically certify a blade's killing efficiency. The process was chillingly methodical. A body, or bodies, would be positioned, often on a mound of packed earth called a dodan. The Yamada clan executioner would take the blade and perform a specific, named cut. The results were then recorded, and for a particularly fine blade, the achievement was chiseled directly into the tang, like a trophy for a master craftsman. You can see the progression in the inscriptions themselves. 1 body, 2 bodies, 3 bodies, each one a testament to a blade that could cut through multiple human spines and rib cages without chipping or bending. The most difficult single cuts had their own names, a gruesome catalog of anatomical challenges. A cut through the hip bones, the the thickest and most difficult part of the human skeleton. A cut through the torso at just the right angle to sever the shoulders. But the ultimate test was stacking. 2, 3, 4 bodies piled one on top of the other, a mass of flesh and bone that had to be cleaved in a single, fluid stroke. And then, there is the 7-body cut. Think about the physics of that. The immense, focused power required to drive a blade through 7 human torsos. Expert analysis confirms the force needed is almost superhuman, at the absolute edge of what is physically possible. It required a blade of impossible sharpness and resilience, and an executioner with terrifying strength and flawless technique. This wasn't a frenzied act of rage. It was a cold, precise application of force, the grim endpoint of a deadly science. But this science shows us how the samurai class perfected the act of killing others. What happens when that same cold precision, that same anatomical knowledge, what happens when the code demands a samurai perform the ultimate act of violence upon himself? The code demanded that this ultimate act of violence upon himself be seen as the ultimate expression of his honor. It is the most famous ritual of the samurai code, seppuku. The image is iconic. A samurai, clad in ceremonial white robes, kneels serenely on a tatami mat. He calmly composes a final death poem, his face a mask of discipline and control. He then takes a short blade, the tanto, and with an act of supreme willpower, ends his own life. We are told it was a noble death, a way to preserve one's honor in the face of failure or defeat. This, too, is a lie. The reality was a medical nightmare, choreographed to look like a suicide. The first cut alone, a deep slice across the abdomen, would induce profound shock and unimaginable pain as the blade severs muscle and tears through the stomach and intestines. But the most revered form, the one lauded in samurai texts, demanded a second, vertical cut upwards from the center of the first. This is the Jumonji Giri, the cross-shaped cut. Our analysis shows this was a medical impossibility for a man in that state of agony and shock. It was an ideal, not a reality. A piece of propaganda designed to showcase an impossible level of self-control. The true art of seppuku belonged to the man standing behind with a sword, the kaishakunin, or the second. He wasn't just an assistant to end the suffering. He was the master of the ceremony. His job was not just to behead, but to do so with the precision of a surgeon. The goal was a specific cut known as dakikubi. This required severing the spinal column and arteries while deliberately leaving a flap of skin and flesh at the throat. Why? To prevent the head from rolling away, which was considered undignified. Instead, the head would fall forward into the dead man's lap, as if in a final, respectful bow. It was a ritual of choreographed mutilation, an execution disguised as a noble suicide. And for all its clinical horror, this was a privilege. A death reserved for the warrior class. It begs a terrifying question. If this was the honorable way to die, what did a death designed for pure degradation look like for those at the very bottom of society? For those at the bottom, a death designed for pure degradation was not just an execution. It was a complete inversion of honor, a public spectacle of dehumanization. But it gets worse. For crimes considered the most heinous, like a commoner daring to kill a samurai, a special punishment was reserved. One that represents a truly human invention of horror. Forget the swiftness of the sword or the ritual of seppuku. This was something else entirely. First, they would bury you in the earth, up to your neck, your body trapped and helpless, your head exposed to the elements and the eyes of the world. Your head would be fixed in a pillory, forcing you to stare straight ahead. Then, they would place a saw beside you, not a sharp steel saw, but a crude bamboo saw, its fibrous edge designed not to cut, but to tear and shred. This was nokogiri biki, death by sawing. But there was a final, horrifying detail that elevates this from mere execution to a form of societal madness. A sign was posted, a formal invitation to any man, woman, or child who passed by to take up the saw and make a single cut into your neck. It was a civic duty of torture. One person might make a shallow slice, an hour later, another might deepen it. Death would not come for days. You would be fully conscious, feeling every grating pass of the dull blade, hearing the wet, tearing sound as it snagged on muscle and grated against your vertebrae. Can you imagine the sound? The smell of your own blood and decaying tissue baking in the sun? This was not justice. This was a societal descent into torture, codified by law. It made the public complicit in the horror, transforming an entire community into a slow-motion lynch mob. This is the absolute bedrock of the system, the final expression of a code that valued status so highly it could justify this. Having seen this, having reached the bottom, there is nowhere else to go. The only question that remains is, why? What does this capacity for methodical, scientific, and even participatory cruelty tell us about the nature of power itself? The answer to why is as simple as it is terrifying. Because they could. Because when power is absolute and unchecked, the most efficient tool of control is fear. And the most efficient way to generate fear is to make a spectacle of the human body. We've seen the evidence. The eyewitness accounts of crucifixions, the cold anatomical logs of the Yamada clan, the bureaucratic legal codes that prescribe the slow agony of the saw. These aren't just relics of a brutal past, they are blueprints. They are instruction manuals for how to systematize cruelty, how to wrap it in the language of justice and honor, and how to make it an accepted, even necessary, part of a society. The samurai are gone, but the lesson of their justice remains. It teaches us that when power is absolute, the human body becomes a canvas on which to display it. The myth of honor is always a shield, hiding a terrifying truth, that any society, given the right mixture of fear and control, can codify cruelty. It can turn torture into a science and murder into a ritual. Look around. The tools have changed, but the architecture of power remains. The executioner's log becomes the classified memo. The public crucifixion becomes the televised show of force. The code of Bushido becomes the noble justification used to explain away the uncomfortable necessities of maintaining order. Every system that seeks to control people creates a story to tell itself, a myth that makes its violence palatable. The genius of the samurai code was its beautiful, compelling, and ultimately deceptive myth of honor. The question is, what are our myths? What are the beautiful stories we tell ourselves to hide the ugly mechanics of the systems we live in? The sword does not lie. It has no myth. It simply asks us to see the truth that was hidden in plain sight all along, and to ask ourselves, what truths are we hiding today?